Two bear cubs chained in the middle of forest, crying for help. What this human baby did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The sunlight filtered through the dense canopy of oak trees, casting dappled shadows across the forest clearing. Birds sang their gentle melodies, and the soft rustle of leaves created a peaceful symphony that had remained undisturbed for centuries. This tranquil corner of the wilderness, nestled between rolling hills and a small stream, had always been a sanctuary for the creatures that called it home. But today, something was terribly wrong. Two heartbreaking cries pierced the serene atmosphere, echoing through the trees and silencing the songbirds. The desperate whimpers grew louder, carrying the unmistakable sound of fear and pain. At the center of the clearing, partially hidden by tall grass, two small brown bear cubs lay trembling. Their soft fur was matted with dirt and tears, and around their tiny necks were heavy metal chains anchored to a rusted stake driven deep into the earth. Each time they tried to move, the cruel metal bit into their flesh, causing them to cry out again in agony. The smaller cub, with patches of cinnamon-colored fur on its ears, pawed helplessly at the chain, its frightened eyes darting back and forth searching for its mother. The slightly larger cub had already exhausted itself from struggling and now lay whimpering, its small chest heaving with each labored breath. Blood tinged the fur where the chains had rubbed their necks raw. The cubs couldn't have been more than a few months old, far too young to survive without their mother's protection and care. "Mama! Mama!" they seemed to cry, though their pleas came out as pitiful whines that would break even the hardest heart. The wind carried their distress calls through the forest, but there was no answering roar from their mother. Only silence greeted their desperate pleas, a silence that spoke of abandonment and cruelty beyond understanding. At the edge of the clearing stood a small wooden cottage, its chimney releasing a thin spiral of smoke into the air. Inside, 20-month-old Noah Parker had just awakened from his afternoon nap. His mother, Emma, was busy hanging laundry in the backyard, believing her son was still asleep in his crib. But Noah, with the curiosity that defined his age, had managed to climb out and toddle to the partially open front door, drawn by the strange sounds coming from the forest. Noah's innocent blue eyes widened as he peered outside. The sorrowful cries touched something deep within his untainted heart. Without hesitation or fear, for he was too young to understand danger, he pushed the door open wider and took unsteady steps toward the source of the distress. His tiny bare feet pressed against the cool forest floor as he ventured farther from the safety of his home than he had ever been before. The cub's cries grew louder as Noah approached the clearing. His favorite teddy bear clutched tightly in one hand. He stumbled forward, driven by a pure and simple instinct to comfort whatever was making those sad sounds. What Noah didn't know, what no one in the peaceful valley knew, was that he was walking straight into a situation that would soon bring hardened adults to their knees with emotion. Behind him, the door of the cottage swung gently in the breeze, creaking softly as if trying to call him back to safety. But Noah continued forward, one small step at a time, about to forge a connection between innocence and suffering that would change everything in ways no one could have imagined. As Noah entered the clearing, the cubs instantly sensed his presence. The larger cub stopped whimpering and raised its head, dark eyes locking onto the small human figure. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the leaves stopped rustling, as if nature itself was watching this unexpected encounter unfold. Noah stopped a few feet away from the chained cubs, his thumb finding its way to his mouth as he observed them with wonder. "Bear," he whispered, the simple word carrying all the awe his young mind could express. He clutched his teddy bear tighter, looking down at the stuffed toy and then back at the real cubs before him. In his innocent mind, these were simply larger versions of his beloved toy, creatures meant for hugging, not fearing. The smaller cub made a soft sound, somewhere between a whimper and a curious grunt. It tried to move toward Noah but was yanked back by the cruel chain, causing it to yelp in pain. Blood trickled from beneath the metal collar, staining its fur a deeper red. Noah's face scrunched up in concern. Even at his young age, he recognized suffering when he saw it. "Owie," he said softly, taking another step closer. "Bear Owie." Meanwhile, back at the cottage, Emma Parker had finished hanging the laundry and returned inside, humming a gentle tune. She walked toward Noah's bedroom to check on him, expecting to find her son still sleeping peacefully in his crib. Her heart nearly stopped when she discovered the empty bed. "Noah?" she called out, her voice rising with panic. "Noah, where are you?" Emma rushed through the small cottage, checking every possible hiding place where her adventurous toddler might have concealed himself. When she noticed the front door ajar, a cold dread washed over her. She ran to the doorway, her eyes frantically scanning the tree line. "Noah!" she screamed, her mother's instinct telling her something was terribly wrong. In the clearing, Noah was now just inches away from the suffering cubs. He reached out a small hand, his movements slow and gentle. The larger cub watched warily but didn't growl or show signs of aggression. Perhaps it was too weak from struggling against its bonds, or perhaps it sensed something special about this small human who approached without fear or malice. Noah's tiny fingers touched the cub's head, patting it awkwardly the way he patted his teddy bear. "Nice bear," he cooed softly. "No cry." The cub flinched at first, but then leaned into his touch, desperate for any comfort in its miserable state. The smaller cub watched this interaction and made a sound almost like a mewling kitten, wanting the same gentle touch. Noah turned his attention to it, his little hand now stroking its matted fur with surprising tenderness. What Noah and the cubs didn't realize was that they were being watched. From the shadows of the forest, a pair of cold eyes observed the scene with calculating interest. Jacob Mercer, a local poacher known for his cruelty and greed, had set this trap for the mother bear. He had chained her cubs as bait, knowing she would return for them, making her an easy target for his rifle. What he hadn't counted on was a toddler wandering into his twisted plan. Jacob shifted his position behind a large oak tree, his weathered hand tightening around his hunting rifle. The situation had become complicated. He couldn't risk shooting with a child present, not because he cared about the boy's safety, but because gunshots would alert others to his illegal hunting activities. He decided to wait and see how this strange scene would unfold, his impatience growing with each passing minute. In another part of the forest, a massive female bear crashed through the undergrowth, her powerful muscles propelling her forward with single-minded determination. She had been searching for her cubs since dawn when they had disappeared from their den. Her keen nose had finally caught their scent on the wind, along with the unmistakable smell of their fear and blood. Maternal rage fueled her every step as she raced toward the clearing, ready to destroy anything that threatened her beloved cubs. Back in the clearing, Noah had settled himself on the ground between the two chained cubs. In a gesture that would later bring hardened forest rangers to tears, he had placed his teddy bear between the suffering animals. "Share," he said simply, patting each cub and then his teddy bear in turn. All better. The cubs had stopped crying, finding inexplicable comfort in the presence of this tiny human who showed them nothing but gentleness. They nuzzled against him, their chains clinking with each movement, a harsh reminder of their captivity amidst this moment of unexpected peace. Emma's frantic calls grew louder as she approached the clearing, her heart pounding with terror at what might have happened to her son. At the same time, the mother bear was closing in from the opposite direction, her powerful strides eating up the distance between her and her cubs. Noah remained blissfully unaware of the danger converging on him from all sides, the desperate mother racing toward the cottage, the vengeful mother bear charging through the forest, and the cold-hearted poacher watching from the shadows with his finger hovering near the trigger of his rifle. The toddler simply continued to comfort the cubs, talking to them in his limited vocabulary, offering them the pure compassion that only a child untouched by the world's cruelty could provide. Then came the moment that would change everything. Emma burst into the clearing, just as the mother bear emerged from the opposite side. Their eyes met over the tableau of Noah sitting peacefully between the chained cubs. Time seemed to freeze as human mother and bear mother took in the scene before them, both driven by the same primal instinct to protect their young. "Noah!" Emma screamed, her voice shattering the silence. She started forward, but stopped abruptly when the mother bear let out a thunderous roar that shook the very air around them. The massive animal rose to her full height, nearly 7 feet tall on her hind legs, her powerful front paws armed with deadly claws that could tear through flesh with terrifying ease. Noah looked up at the sound of his mother's voice, his face breaking into a delighted smile. "Mama, bears!" he called out excitedly, completely oblivious to the danger. He patted the cubs again, proud to show his mother his new friends. The mother bear dropped back to all fours and took a step toward Noah and her cubs. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to run to her child, but she knew any sudden movement might trigger the bear's protective rage. Frozen in place, tears streaming down her face, she could only watch as the massive predator approached her defenseless son. "Please," she whispered, though whether she was pleading with God or the bear itself, she couldn't say. "Please don't hurt him." From his hidden position, Jacob Mercer raised his rifle, aiming at the mother bear's head. A clean shot would take her down before she could harm the boy. Not that he cared about the child's welfare. A dead bear was a dead bear, and her pelt would fetch a handsome price. His finger tightened on the trigger. What happened next would later be described as nothing short of miraculous. The mother bear reached Noah and the cubs, her enormous head lowering to sniff at her chained offspring. The cubs whimpered and strained toward her, their chains preventing them from reaching their mother. Noah, still smiling, reached up and touched the mother bear's nose without a trace of fear. "Big Bear," he said happily. "Baby Bear Zoe." He pointed to the chains and then looked at the mother bear with solemn eyes. "Help." The mother bear made a rumbling sound deep in her throat. She nudged her cubs gently, inspecting their wounds where the chains had cut into their flesh. Then, to Emma's astonishment, the massive creature sat back on her haunches next to Noah, not in a threatening posture but almost as if waiting. Emma took a hesitant step forward, then another. The bear watched her, but made no aggressive move. It was as if some unspoken understanding had passed between the two mothers, human and animal, bridged by the innocent presence of a child who saw no difference between them. "I'm going to help them," Emma said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm going to help your babies." From the forest edge, a new figure appeared. Oliver Westbrook, the local forest ranger who had been tracking the poacher's activities for weeks. He had heard Emma's scream and rushed to investigate. The scene before him was so extraordinary that he stopped in his tracks, his experienced mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Don't move," he called out quietly to Emma. "Any of you." But Emma had already reached Noah and knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around her son while keeping her movements slow and deliberate. The mother bear observed them, but remained remarkably calm, her focus primarily on her suffering cubs. "There's a poacher," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He chained these cubs. We need to free them." Oliver nodded, his hand moving to the radio on his belt to call for backup. That's when a shot rang out from the trees, the sound exploding through the clearing like thunder. Birds scattered from the treetops in a flurry of panicked wings. The mother bear roared and spun toward the source of the sound, but surprisingly, she wasn't the target. Oliver cried out and fell to one knee, clutching his arm where the bullet had grazed him. Jacob Mercer emerged from his hiding place, his face contorted with anger as he chambered another round. "Stay out of this, Westbrook," he shouted. "Those bears are mine." What the poacher didn't anticipate was the reaction of the forest itself. His shot had disturbed a nest of hornets in a nearby tree. The angry insects swarmed out in a dark cloud, disoriented and aggressive. By sheer misfortune, or perhaps justice, a significant portion of the swarm descended upon Jacob, who screamed and flailed as hundreds of stingers found their mark on his exposed skin. In the chaos that followed, Emma made a decision that defied all logic and self-preservation. With the mother bear distracted by the commotion, she reached for the chains holding the cubs captive. Up close, she could see that they were secured with simple padlocks. The poacher had obviously planned to return and collect his bait once the mother was dead. "Keys," she muttered frantically, looking around. "There must be keys somewhere." Oliver, despite his injury, had crawled toward them. "Check his backpack," he said, nodding toward a camouflage bag partially hidden in the tall grass near the stake where the cubs were chained. Poachers like him usually keep their equipment close. Emma reached for the bag and dumped its contents onto the ground. Among the various hunting supplies, a small ring of keys gleamed in the dappled sunlight. Her hands shaking, she tried one key after another in the padlocks while Noah continued to pat and comfort the cubs. "Hurry," Oliver urged, keeping one eye on the mother bear who was now watching them intensely again, her massive body tense as if ready to charge. The first padlock clicked open. The smaller cub immediately pulled free, the chain falling away from its bloodied neck. It stumbled toward its mother, but then, incredibly, turned back toward Noah, nuzzling against the boy's leg before seeking its mother's protection. "One more," Emma whispered, working on the second lock with fingers that felt numb with fear. The mother bear took a step toward them, and Oliver positioned himself between the animal and Emma and Noah, ready to sacrifice himself if necessary. Jacob's screams had diminished to whimpers as he stumbled blindly through the forest, his face and hands swollen beyond recognition from the hornet stings. The forest seemed to have delivered its own form of justice to the man who had caused so much suffering. With a final click, the second lock opened. The larger cub was free. It shook itself vigorously, as if trying to shake off the memory of captivity along with the hated chain, then pressed its nose briefly against Noah's cheek in what could only be described as a gesture of gratitude, before bounding to its mother's side. The mother bear gathered her cubs close, inspecting them thoroughly, licking their wounds with maternal tenderness. Then she turned her attention back to the humans before her, the small boy who had comforted her young, the woman who had freed them, and the man who had tried to protect them all. What happened next would become a story told and retold in the valley for generations to come. The mother bear approached Noah, her movements deliberate but gentle. Emma's heart threatened to burst from her chest as she instinctively tightened her grip on her son. Oliver reached for his tranquilizer gun with his good arm, knowing it would be too little, too late if the bear decided to attack. But attack was the furthest thing from the mother bear's mind. She lowered her massive head until she was eye level with the toddler. Noah, still clutching his teddy bear in one arm, reached out with his free hand and touched the bear's wet nose, giggling at the sensation. "Nice bear," he said simply, repeating the same words he had spoken to the cubs. The mother bear made a soft huffing sound, her breath warm against Noah's face. Then, in a gesture that brought Oliver to tears despite his years of experience in the wilderness, she gently nudged the boy's chest with her nose. Not hard enough to knock him over, but with enough pressure to communicate something beyond human understanding. Emma, unable to contain her emotions, let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. The mother bear's eyes, intelligent and surprisingly expressive, shifted to her, and for a moment the two mothers seemed to share a silent communication that transcended species, a mutual recognition of the fierce love that drove them both to protect their young at any cost. The spell was broken by the sound of approaching vehicles and voices calling Oliver's name. The backup he had radioed for earlier had arrived. The mother bear's head shot up, her ears flattening against her skull at this new potential threat. With one last look at Noah, she gathered her cubs with a soft grunt and disappeared into the forest, a massive shadow melting between the trees with surprising grace for a creature of her size. By the time the other rangers reached the clearing, the bears were gone. All that remained were the chains, the abandoned poacher's equipment, and 3 humans with a story that sounded too incredible to believe. "You're saying a mother bear just let you free her cubs and didn't attack?" Ranger Sarah Collins asked skeptically as she bandaged Oliver's arm. "In all my years, I've never heard of such a thing." "It was the boy," Oliver said, nodding toward Noah, who was now safely nestled in Emma's arms, beginning to doze off after his extraordinary adventure. "There was something, I don't know how to explain it. The way he approached those cubs without fear, the way he touched them with such gentleness. It was like he created a bridge between our worlds." Emma kissed her son's forehead, tears still flowing freely down her cheeks. "He's always had a special way with animals. I just never imagined." Her voice broke as the full weight of what could have happened, what should have happened according to every law of nature, hit her anew. "The mother bear could have killed him with one swipe of her paw," she whispered. "But instead she trusted him. She trusted us to help her babies." As the rangers secured the scene and radioed for medical assistance for Jacob Mercer, who had been found a quarter-mile away, nearly unconscious from anaphylactic shock, Oliver knelt beside Emma and Noah. "Your son did something today that I've never seen in 30 years as a ranger," he said softly. "He reminded us that sometimes innocence is more powerful than experience, and kindness more effective than force." Noah stirred in his mother's arms, his eyes fluttering open. "Bears gone?" he asked sleepily. "Yes, sweetie," Emma replied, stroking his hair. "The bears are gone. They went home with their mommy." Noah smiled, satisfied with this answer, and clutched his teddy bear closer. "Bears better now, no Owie." The story of Noah Parker and the bears spread quickly throughout the small community. Some dismissed it as an exaggeration, a lucky escape embellished into something more meaningful. But those who had been there, who had witnessed the extraordinary connection between a toddler and the wild creatures most adults feared, knew the truth was far more profound than fiction. A week later, as dawn broke over the valley, Emma was awakened by Noah's excited voice calling from the living room of their cottage. She rushed out to find him pointing out the window, bouncing on his toes with excitement. "Mama, look! Bears!" Emma's heart nearly stopped as she peered through the glass. There, at the edge of the forest, stood the mother bear with her cubs. They made no move to approach the cottage but simply stood watching. The cubs now visibly healthier, their wounds healing. The mother bear raised her head, seeming to make direct eye contact with Emma, then turned and led her cubs back into the depths of the forest. That same day, Jacob Mercer faced a judge for his poaching activities, his face still swollen from the hornet stings that many locals described as the forest's justice. His lengthy criminal record of wildlife violations ensured he would spend years behind bars. His days of terrorizing the forest's inhabitants finally over. As for Noah, he seemed unchanged by his adventure, too young to understand how extraordinary it had been. But something had changed in the relationship between the human community and the wild creatures with whom they shared the valley. Donations poured in to support anti-poaching efforts. Volunteers helped Oliver establish wildlife corridors and protected areas. People began to speak of the bears not as threats to be feared, but as neighbors to be respected. And sometimes, in the quiet of early morning or the golden light of dusk, hikers would report seeing a mother bear and her cubs watching them from a distance with unusual calmness, as if assessing whether these humans possessed the same gentle heart as the small boy who had shown them kindness when they needed it most. Years later, when Noah was old enough to understand, Emma would tell him the story of that day in the clearing. She would show him the newspaper clippings, the commendation Oliver had received for his bravery, and the changes their community had made to protect the forest and its inhabitants. "You taught us all something important that day," she would tell him. "You showed us that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in facing danger with strength, but in approaching suffering with kindness." And Noah would smile, not fully remembering but somehow knowing in his heart that it was true. For in his innocent act of compassion toward two suffering cubs, he had awakened something profound in all who witnessed it. A reminder that the barriers we perceive between ourselves and the natural world are perhaps not as impenetrable as we believe, and that even the smallest hands can build bridges where none seemed possible before. The events of that day continued to shape Noah's life in ways neither he nor his mother could have predicted. As he grew older, Noah developed an uncanny ability to connect with animals that others found unapproachable. By the age of 7, he had become something of a local legend in the valley. Injured wildlife would mysteriously appear near their cottage, as if drawn to the gentle presence of the boy who had once comforted 2 chained bear cubs. On Noah's 8th birthday, a surprise visitor arrived at their door. Oliver Westbrook, now the head ranger of the expanded wildlife preserve that surrounded their valley, stood on their porch with a wrapped package and news that would change their lives once again. "They've been sighted again," he said quietly as Emma invited him in. "The mother and cubs, well, they're not cubs anymore. They're nearly full-grown now, but we can identify them by the scarring around their necks. They've established territory about 3 miles from here." Emma set down the mug of coffee she had been preparing with hands that suddenly trembled. "Are they causing problems?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. Despite the years that had passed, she still woke sometimes from dreams of that day in the clearing, of massive paws and gentle nudges, and what might have happened if things had gone differently. Oliver shook his head. "Quite the opposite, actually. They avoid humans entirely, except for one group." He smiled at Noah, who was listening intently from his seat at the kitchen table. "The research team has observed them deliberately making appearances during your class field trips to the preserve. They keep their distance, but they always show up when you're there. It's as if they're checking on you." Noah's eyes widened. Though his memory of that day had faded into the hazy recollections of early childhood, the connection he felt with the forest and its inhabitants had only grown stronger with time. "Can I see them?" he asked eagerly. "Up close, I mean." Oliver exchanged a glance with Emma, whose face had paled at the suggestion. "That's actually why I'm here," he said carefully. We've received a substantial grant to study interspecies connection and communication. The Foundation heard about what happened with you and the bears, and they're interested in exploring whether that kind of bond can be developed in controlled circumstances. You want to use my son as bait? Emma asked sharply, protective instincts flaring instantly. No, no, Oliver assured her quickly. Nothing like that. We're establishing a rehabilitation center for injured wildlife within the preserve. Noah would be completely safe, behind appropriate barriers, but able to observe and potentially interact with animals being prepared for release. Given his unique affinity, we believe his presence might accelerate the healing process for some of our more traumatized rescues. Noah leaped from his chair, excitement radiating from him. Can I, Mom? Please? Emma hesitated, years of maternal worry warring with the knowledge that her son possessed a gift that could genuinely help the creatures of the forest. I would need to be there, she said finally. At least at first. Oliver nodded. We anticipated that. In fact, we're offering you a position as well, community liaison for the center. Your background in elementary education would be invaluable for developing programs to teach local children about wildlife conservation. And so began a new chapter in their lives. The Rehabilitation Center, built with sustainable materials and designed to minimize human impact on the forest, quickly became a haven not only for injured wildlife, but for Noah's blossoming talents. Under Oliver's mentorship and with Emma's unwavering support, Noah learned to channel his natural empathy into practical skills, recognizing signs of stress in animals, creating environments that promoted healing, and knowing when to intervene and when to step back. But the most extraordinary development came 6 months after the center opened. Noah, now 9 years old, was sitting quietly in the observation area adjacent to a large enclosed space where a recently rescued wolf was recovering from injuries sustained in an illegal trap. The wolf, a young female, had refused to eat since arriving 3 days earlier, despite the veterinarian's best efforts. Noah watched her through the one-way glass, his expression solemn beyond his years. She's not eating because she's waiting, he said softly to Emma, who sat beside him. She has puppies somewhere. She's worried about them. Emma had learned to trust her son's intuitions about animals, even when they seemed impossible. Can you tell where? She asked gently. Noah closed his eyes, his face scrunching in concentration. I see. Rocks, a fallen tree, water nearby. His eyes flew open. The old creek bed. The one that dried up last summer. There's a hollow under the roots of that big oak that fell during the storm. Though skeptical, Oliver assembled a small search team. Led by Noah's surprisingly specific directions, they found exactly what he had described. A den containing 4 wolf pups, weak with hunger but alive. The puppies were brought to the center and reunited with their mother, who immediately began to eat and care for her young once they were returned to her. Word of Noah's extraordinary ability spread beyond their small community. Researchers, veterinarians, and wildlife experts began to visit the center, some skeptical, others eager to witness what many were calling the Noah effect, the inexplicable calm that seemed to descend upon even the most distressed animals in the boy's presence. Among these visitors was Dr. Aymara Okafor, a renowned expert in animal cognition from the National Wildlife Research Institute. Unlike many of the scientists who had come before her, Dr. Okafor approached Noah not as a curiosity to be studied, but as a colleague with unique insights. What you're experiencing is rare, but not unique, she told him during one of their many conversations, as they observed a rehabilitating eagle. Throughout history, there have been accounts of individuals who possessed unusual connections with animals, Most were dismissed as folklore or exaggeration, but I believe there's something more at work, perhaps a heightened sensitivity to nonverbal cues or even pheromonal communication that operates below conscious awareness. Noah considered this thoughtfully. I don't really think about how it works, he admitted. It just feels like listening with more than my ears. He hesitated, then added something he had never told anyone, not even his mother. Sometimes I dream what they dream. I see through their eyes. Dr. Okafor's interest was piqued. Would you be willing to participate in some non-invasive studies? Nothing that would cause stress to you or the animals, simply monitoring brain activity during your interactions. It could help us understand not just your gift, but animal consciousness as well. With Emma's cautious approval, Noah agreed. For the next several months, he wore unobtrusive sensors during his daily work at the center. The data collected was remarkable, showing synchronous patterns between Noah's brain activity and that of the animals with whom he was interacting, particularly in regions associated with empathy and emotional processing. Yet, even as scientific understanding of Noah's abilities grew, so did an undercurrent of something more troubling. Whispers began to circulate about a boy who could control wild animals. Sensationalized stories appeared online, distorting what happened at the rehabilitation center into something mysterious and potentially threatening. The tension came to a head during Noah's 11th birthday. The center had organized a small celebration, with cake and presents set up in the outdoor education area. Noah was opening gifts when a commotion at the perimeter fence caught everyone's attention. A group of men in camouflage clothing were arguing with security personnel. Their leader, a burly man with a face that seemed permanently set in a scowl, pointed repeatedly at Noah. "The boy's unnatural," his voice carried across the compound. "It ain't right what he does to those animals. They should be wild, not turned into pets for some freak show." Noah froze, the half-unwrapped present forgotten in his hands. Emma moved instinctively to shield her son, but the damage was done. For the first time, Noah confronted the reality that his gift, something that had always felt natural and right to him, was viewed with fear and suspicion by some. That night, after the protesters had been escorted away, and the birthday celebration had continued with forced cheerfulness, Noah slipped out of bed. The full moon illuminated the path as he made his way to a small meditation garden that had been built behind the rehabilitation center, a quiet space where staff could decompress after difficult days. He sat on a stone bench, tears flowing freely down his face as he wrestled with the harsh words he had heard. Was he doing something wrong? Was he somehow harming the animals by helping them? Lost in these painful thoughts, he didn't notice the soft padding of paws until a warm presence settled beside him on the bench. Noah startled, then froze in astonishment. Sitting next to him, close enough to touch but making no threatening moves, was a massive brown bear with familiar intelligent eyes and distinctive scarring on her neck. The mother bear from that day in the clearing, now older and grayer around the muzzle, but unmistakable. Noah's breath caught in his throat. Though he had learned to remain calm around wild animals, this unexpected encounter, outside the controlled environment of the rehabilitation enclosures, tested even his extraordinary composure. "Hello," he whispered, hardly daring to move. "Do you remember me?" The bear made a soft huffing sound, then gently nudged Noah's hand with her nose, the same gesture she had made years ago in the clearing. Noah felt a wave of emotion wash over him, not his own, but somehow transmitted from the magnificent creature beside him. Gratitude, recognition, and something that felt remarkably like reassurance. For nearly an hour, boy and bear sat side by side in the moonlight. no words needed between them. When Noah finally stood to return to his room, the bear rose as well, gave him one last meaningful look, then disappeared into the forest as silently as she had appeared. When Noah told his mother and Oliver about the encounter the next morning, their initial shock and concern quickly gave way to wonder. Security footage confirmed the extraordinary visitation, showing the bear easily scaling the perimeter fence, a barrier designed to keep humans out rather than wildlife in, and making her deliberate way to where Noah sat alone. "She came to comfort you," Emma said softly, watching the footage with tears in her eyes. "Somehow, she knew you were upset." Dr. Okafor, when shown the recording, was rendered momentarily speechless, an unusual state for the normally articulate scientist. "This changes everything," she finally said. "This isn't just heightened sensitivity on your part, Noah. This suggests active, reciprocal communication across species boundaries. The bear sought you out deliberately, with apparent awareness of your emotional state. The incident with the protesters and the bear's unexpected visit catalyzed a transformation in how Noah understood his role in the world." With guidance from Dr. Okafor, Emma, and Oliver, he began to develop his abilities more systematically, not just responding to animals in distress, but actively seeking to deepen the communication between himself and various species. By his 13th birthday, Noah had worked with over 50 different species at the Rehabilitation Center. His journal, filled with detailed observations and insights, became a valuable resource for researchers and rehabilitators around the world. But his most profound work remained with the bears, particularly the aging mother bear and her now adult cubs who continued to make their home in the forests surrounding the valley. Through careful observation and what Noah described as shared dreaming, he had learned that the bears had a complex social structure and rich emotional lives. He discovered that they remembered injuries and kindnesses alike, passed knowledge from generation to generation, and possessed individual personalities as distinct as those of humans. What no one anticipated, however, was how Noah's deepening connection with the forest and its inhabitants would prepare him for a crisis that no one saw coming. The summer of Noah's 14th year brought unprecedented drought to the valley. Streams dried up, vegetation withered, and the risk of wildfire grew with each passing day. Wildlife began to venture closer to human settlements in search of water, leading to increased conflicts and calls for culling from fearful residents. The Rehabilitation Center, now nationally recognized for its innovative approaches to wildlife conservation, became the focal point of increasingly heated debates. Some saw it as essential for helping animals survive the drought, while others viewed it as attracting dangerous predators to the area. Among the most vocal critics was Garrett Mercer, the son of the poacher who had chained the bear cubs all those years ago. Having grown up visiting his father in prison and hearing his embittered version of events, Garrett had developed a deep resentment toward Noah, the Rehabilitation Center, and everything they represented. Now, in his late 20s, he had gathered a following of like-minded individuals who believed that nature should be controlled rather than respected. One sweltering afternoon, as the temperature climbed past 100 degrees, Noah was helping to fill water stations throughout the preserve when he felt it, a deep, primal terror that struck him like a physical blow. He stumbled, dropping the water container he had been carrying. "Fire," he gasped, though there was no smoke visible, no alarms sounding. "There's a fire coming." Oliver, who had been working alongside him, looked alarmed. "Are you sure?" "The detection systems haven't picked up anything." But Noah was already running toward the center's main building, his heart pounding with urgency that wasn't entirely his own. "It's on the North Ridge," he called over his shoulder. "The bears know. They're running. Though skeptical, Oliver had learned to trust Noah's intuitions. He radioed the fire watch team to investigate the area Noah had indicated. 20 minutes later, his radio crackled with confirmation. A fire had indeed been spotted. Small now, but spreading rapidly in the tinder dry conditions. More disturbing was the report that followed. It appeared to have been deliberately set. The evacuation order came swiftly. Staff hurried to move the animals currently in rehabilitation to the transport vehicles. The permanent residents, animals too injured to ever return to the wild, were loaded first. Chaos reigned as smoke began to darken the sky, and the distant crackle of flames grew steadily louder. In the midst of the evacuation, Noah suddenly went still, his head cocked as if listening to something only he could hear. Without warning, he broke away from the group and sprinted toward the North Trail, directly toward the approaching fire. "Noah!" Emma screamed, attempting to follow him before Oliver held her back. "We can't let him go alone," she pleaded, struggling against his restraining arms. "And I can't let you run into a fire," Oliver replied grimly. "I'll go after him. You finish loading the animals." He grabbed a radio and an emergency pack and set off after Noah, who had already disappeared into the increasingly smoke-obscured forest. Behind him, fire trucks and additional emergency vehicles began to arrive at the center, their sirens adding to the apocalyptic atmosphere. Noah ran with sure-footed determination, guided by something beyond normal senses. The smoke grew thicker around him, stinging his eyes and burning his lungs, but he pressed on. He had felt their terror. The mother bear and one of her offspring trapped by the advancing flames, disoriented by the smoke, unable to find a path to safety. He found them in a small ravine, the older bear limping heavily, a deep gash in her hind leg suggesting she had injured herself trying to escape the fire. The younger bear, a female that Noah recognized by her distinctive chest markings, circled her mother anxiously, unwilling to leave her behind but increasingly panicked by the approaching flames. "This way," Noah called to them, though he knew it was his presence more than his words they would respond to. "Follow me." The younger bear immediately looked toward him, recognition and relief evident in her posture. The mother bear raised her massive head, her eyes meeting Noah's across the smoke-filled space between them. There was intelligence there and trust, but also resignation. She huffed softly, then nudged her daughter toward Noah with her nose. Noah understood with heartbreaking clarity. She was too injured to move quickly enough to escape the fire. She was entrusting her offspring to him. "No," he said firmly, approaching the injured bear without fear, despite her size and the stressed state that would make most wild animals unpredictable and dangerous. "I'm not leaving you." He reached out both physically and with that other sense that had developed within him over the years, the ability to project calm and convey intention across the species barrier. The mother bear let out a low moan, but didn't resist when Noah examined her injured leg. The cut was deep, but had missed the major tendons. If they could bind it and support her weight— "Noah!" Oliver's voice carried through the smoke, followed by the man himself. His face smudged with soot, and his expression a mixture of relief and exasperation at finding his young protege alive. "We have to go now. The fire—" He broke off as he registered the scene before him. Noah kneeling beside the injured bear, her fully grown offspring standing watchfully nearby. "Noah," he said more quietly, "step away slowly. Even with your abilities, an injured predator is unpredictable." "She needs our help," Noah replied, not moving from the bear's side. "We can't leave her to burn." Oliver assessed the situation rapidly, his ranger training warring with what he knew of Noah's extraordinary connection with animals. "The tranquilizer gun is back at the center," he said finally. "And even if we had it, the stress and smoke inhalation would make sedation extremely dangerous." "We don't need to sedate her," Noah said with quiet confidence. "She'll let us help her. But we need something to bind her leg and support her weight." Oliver hesitated only briefly before shrugging off his backpack and retrieving the emergency first aid kit. Working together, they cleaned the wound as best they could and bound it tightly with gauze and the athletic tape Oliver always carried for sprains and strains. For a makeshift crutch, they used a sturdy branch, securing it along the bear's injured leg with strips torn from Oliver's shirt. Throughout the process, the mother bear remained remarkably still, only occasionally making soft sounds of discomfort. Her daughter paced nearby, clearly agitated by the increasingly thick smoke and the distant but rapidly approaching sound of the fire. "We need to move," Oliver urged, glancing anxiously at the orange glow now visible through the trees. "The main fire break is a quarter-mile east of here. If we can get them there, they should be safe." Noah nodded, then turned to the bears. "Come," he said softly, placing one hand gently on the mother bear's shoulder. "We'll help you." What followed was a grueling journey through increasingly smoke-choked forest. The mother bear struggled to move with her injured leg, even with the makeshift support. Several times she stumbled, nearly crushing Noah, who walked beside her, guiding and encouraging her with touch and that silent communication that had become second nature to him. The younger bear led the way, somehow sensing the direction they needed to travel despite the disorienting smoke. Oliver followed behind, keeping a wary eye on their back trail, where the fire gained ground with terrifying speed. His radio crackled occasionally with updates. The fire was spreading faster than predicted, jumping fire breaks, threatening not just the rehabilitation center but the town beyond. They had nearly reached the main fire break, a wide swath of cleared land designed to stop advancing flames, when disaster struck. A burning branch, carried aloft by the rising heat, sailed through the air and landed directly in their path. The dry undergrowth ignited instantly, cutting off their route to safety. The younger bear reared in panic, nearly bolting back the way they had come, directly into the main body of the fire. Noah reached out with his mind, projecting calm and reassurance with every ounce of his concentration. For a moment, it seemed to work. The bear settled, looking back at him with trust overriding her instinctual terror. Then a second burning branch fell, this one striking Oliver's shoulder. He cried out in pain, the sound startling the bears into renewed panic. The mother bear lurched forward, her weight coming down hard on her injured leg. The makeshift splint snapped, and she collapsed with a roar of pain that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. Noah found himself caught in a nightmare scenario. Oliver injured, the mother bear down and unable to rise, her daughter circling in increasing distress, and the fire closing in from all sides. The smoke was so thick now that he could barely see, barely breathe. Despair threatened to overwhelm him for the first time since he was a small child facing those chained cubs. That was when he felt it, a strange calm descending over him like cool water. With it came clarity and purpose and direction. Without fully understanding how he knew, Noah became certain of a path to safety that hadn't been there moments before. "This way," he said to Oliver, helping the man to his feet. Then, to the younger bear, "Help your mother. Please." To Oliver's astonishment, the younger bear moved to her mother's side, positioning herself so that the older bear could lean against her as she struggled back to her feet. Together, the strange procession moved forward, Noah leading, the bears following, and Oliver bringing up the rear, clutching his burned shoulder and wondering if smoke inhalation was causing him to hallucinate the extraordinary scene. The path Noah followed wasn't marked on any map. It twisted between burning trees, sometimes doubling back in ways that seemed counterintuitive, but somehow always led away from the worst of the flames. Later, when asked how he had found it, Noah would simply say that the forest itself had shown him the way. After what seemed like hours, but was perhaps only 20 minutes, they emerged from the burning woods onto the shore of a small lake, one that had been reduced to little more than a muddy pond by the drought, but still contained enough water to serve as a barrier against the approaching fire. Here, finally, they could rest. The bears waded into the shallow water, the coolness bringing visible relief to the mother's injured leg. Oliver sank to the ground, exhaustion and pain etched in every line of his face. Noah remained standing, scanning the shoreline as if expecting something, or someone. He wasn't surprised when figures emerged from the tree line on the opposite shore. Dr. Okafor and a search team, accompanied by several more bears, including the other offspring of the mother bear who had been separated during the initial panic. The reunion between the bear family was a moment of pure joy amidst the disaster. Gentle huffs and nuzzles, and what could only be described as bear hugs. Noah watched with tears streaking clean lines down his smoke-smudged face, feeling their relief and happiness as tangibly as if it were his own. Dr. Okafor made her way around the lake to where Noah and Oliver waited. The fire crews said this area was completely cut off, she said, her voice filled with wonder. They didn't think anyone could have made it through. How did you find this place? Noah shook his head, unable to explain even to himself the certainty that had guided him. I just knew, he said simply. As emergency crews arrived to treat Oliver's burns and evacuate them to safety, news spread rapidly about what Noah had done. Despite efforts by Dr. Okafor and the Rehabilitation Center staff to keep the details private, the story leaked to the press, embellished with each retelling until it seemed that Noah had single-handedly walked through walls of flame with bears at his command. The truth, as Noah tried repeatedly to explain to anyone who would listen, was both simpler and more profound. I didn't control the bears, he insisted. We helped each other, that's all. But the world wanted a more sensational narrative. News vans descended on the valley, reporters clamoring for interviews with the Bear Whisperer, or the Animal Messiah, as some of the more hyperbolic headlines dubbed him. Social media exploded with clips of Noah's previous work at the Rehabilitation Center, many taken out of context and overlaid with dramatic music and breathless commentary. The attention took a heavy toll on Noah, who had always been more comfortable in the quiet company of animals than in the spotlight. He retreated into himself, speaking less, spending hours alone in the small garden behind their home, one of the few structures in the valley that had been spared from the fire. Emma watched her son with growing concern, recognizing the signs of emotional withdrawal that she hadn't seen since those difficult days following the confrontation with the protesters' year. She wasn't surprised when, one morning, she found a note on his pillow. Gone to think. Don't worry, love you. She knew exactly where he had gone. There was a place deep in the unburned section of forest where Noah had often sought solitude. A small clearing remarkably similar to the one where, as a toddler, he had first encountered the chained bear cubs. Emma respected his need for space, but as one day stretched into 2, then 3, her worry grew. On the 4th day, as she was preparing to organize a search, Noah returned. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, moving with surprising grace despite her age and injured leg, was the mother bear. Behind them came the rest of what Noah had come to call the family. 3 adult bears, all offspring of the mother, and 2 younger cubs belonging to the daughter with the distinctive chest markings. Emma froze in the doorway of their cottage, her heart racing at the sight of her son surrounded by massive predators. Yet there was something in Noah's expression, a serenity, a certainty, that kept her from calling out in alarm. Noah approached with the bears following, stopping a respectful distance from the house. "Mom," he said, his voice stronger and more confident than Emma had heard it in weeks, "I need to show you something." Hardly daring to breathe, Emma stepped into the yard. The bears watched her approach but made no threatening moves. The mother bear, in particular, seemed to regard her with what Emma could only describe as recognition. "Do you remember that day in the clearing?" Noah asked softly. "When I was little and you freed the cubs?" Emma nodded, unable to tear her gaze from the massive bear standing calmly beside her son. "I've never forgotten a moment of it." "She remembers too," Noah said, placing a gentle hand on the bear's shoulder. "All these years, she's been watching over us, protecting the valley in her own way. And now, she's asked for our help again, not just for herself, but for all of them." Emma blinked in confusion. "Asked for our help? Noah, what are you talking about?" Noah took a deep breath. "The fire wasn't an accident, Mom. Someone set it deliberately. Someone who wanted to destroy the rehabilitation center and drive the bears away, and they're planning something worse." He went on to explain what he had learned during his days in the forest, how he had connected more deeply than ever before with the bears, experiencing not just their emotions but fragments of their memories. Through them, he had seen glimpses of men placing strange devices throughout the remaining forest, heard snippets of conversations about clearing the land once and for all. "It's Garrett Mercer," Noah said grimly. "He's following in his father's footsteps, but on a much larger scale. He's planning to drive out or kill all the predators so he can develop the land, turn the valley into some kind of wilderness experience resort, where people can pretend to be in nature without any of the actual wildness." Emma wanted to dismiss her son's claims as imagination, or the result of trauma from the fire, but she had witnessed too many inexplicable things over the years to doubt him now. "We need to tell Oliver and Dr. Okafor," she said finally. "If there's evidence of arson and illegal activity in the preserved lands." "There is evidence," Noah assured her. "The bears can show us where. But we need to hurry. Mercer's men are moving quickly now that the fire has cleared so much of the forest." What followed was an extraordinary expedition into the heart of the burned forest. Noah, Emma, Oliver, and Dr. Okafor were guided by the Bear family to locations where Mercer's team had placed what turned out to be explosive devices, designed to trigger landslides and redirect the watershed, essentially rendering the remaining forest uninhabitable for most wildlife. The physical evidence, combined with security camera footage from the edges of the preserve that showed Mercer and his associates entering restricted areas, was enough for authorities to obtain search warrants. The subsequent investigation uncovered a network of corruption that included local officials who had been bribed to look the other way, while Mercer implemented his destructive plans. The case against Mercer and his accomplices was airtight, resulting in lengthy prison sentences and substantial financial penalties that would be directed toward forest restoration and expanded wildlife protection. But the legal victory, satisfying as it was overshadowed by a more profound development in Noah's relationship with the forest and its inhabitants. "We stand at a crossroads in human history," Noah began, his voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "For millennia, we have defined ourselves largely in opposition to the natural world, as conquerors, as exploiters, as being separate from and superior to the complex web of life that sustains us. That path has led us to the brink of ecological collapse and spiritual impoverishment. But there is another way forward, one that our ancestors knew before we forgot. one that children instinctively understand before we teach them otherwise. It begins with the simple recognition that consciousness is not the exclusive domain of humanity, but a shared attribute of all living things, expressed in different forms and frequencies but fundamentally connected across the boundaries of species. As Noah spoke, he extended his awareness throughout the massive chamber, sensing the mixture of hope, skepticism, wonder, and resistance among the assembled representatives. He did not try to impose his perspective, but simply opened himself to them as he had learned to do with the creatures of the forest, offering connection rather than persuasion. I stand before you not as an anomaly or a prophet, but as a reminder of what is possible when we approach the world with openness instead of fear, with humility instead of dominance. The abilities that my fellow bridge minds and I have developed are not supernatural gifts, but natural capacities that lie dormant in most humans, awaiting only the right circumstances and intention to awaken. On the screens behind him, the image changed to show Noah as a toddler, sitting between the chained bear cubs in that fateful clearing, his small hand gently patting their heads, while his innocent face showed nothing but compassion. A collective murmur passed through the assembly as they witnessed the moment that had started it all. "Look at this child," Noah continued, his voice softening. He didn't know that bears were supposed to be dangerous. He didn't know he was supposed to be afraid. He saw only suffering and responded with kindness, the most basic human instinct before we learn to categorize and divide the world. And in that simple act, something extraordinary was born, a connection that would grow to heal not just those two cubs, but an entire ecosystem of relationships. The image shifted again to show the mother bear in her final days, surrounded by her offspring and their cubs, with Noah sitting quietly among them, an acceptance that defied conventional understanding of predator-prey dynamics. "What you see here isn't just about communication," Noah explained. "It's about communion, a recognition of shared existence that transcends our differences. The mother bear you see here taught me more about courage, devotion, and wisdom than many human teachers could have. And when she allowed me to share in her consciousness, she offered not just her own perspective, but a glimpse of a way of being in the world that we humans have largely forgotten." In the audience, Emma wiped tears from her eyes, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her son to this moment. Beside her sat Dr. Okafor, Oliver, and Lily Redfeather, each representing different aspects of the bridge that Noah had helped to build between human understanding and the wisdom of the natural world. "The Declaration of Interspecies Rights before you today isn't merely a legal document," Noah continued, his gaze sweeping across the assembly. "It's an acknowledgement of a truth that indigenous peoples have known for millennia, and that modern science is finally beginning to recognize, that we exist within a community of consciousness far more diverse and intricate than we have allowed ourselves to perceive. When we extend rights and recognition to non-human consciousnesses, we aren't diminishing humanity. We're expanding it, returning to a more complete understanding of our place in the living world." As Noah concluded his address, a profound silence fell over the assembly hall. Then, from somewhere in the back of the chamber, a sound began, soft at first, then growing in volume and intensity. A rhythmic tapping, not of applause, but something more deliberate. Noah recognized it immediately, the sound of palm against desk, mimicking the gentle patting touch that a small boy had once offered to two frightened cubs. The pattern spread throughout the chamber as representatives from nation after nation joined in. A simple gesture acknowledging that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes not from complex treaties or technological solutions, but from the pure impulse of compassion that even a child can understand. Outside the United Nations building, As if responding to some unheard signal, birds gathered in unprecedented numbers on the surrounding trees and structures. In parks and natural areas across the city, wildlife emerged at the edges of human spaces, not in aggression or desperation, but in what observers would later describe as a form of witness. Around the world, bridge mines reported similar phenomena occurring simultaneously, a planetary response to this pivotal moment in the relationship between humans and the rest of life on Earth. The declaration was ratified that afternoon by an overwhelming majority of member nations. As Noah left the podium, he felt a familiar presence touch his consciousness, not physically present but connected across the distance that separated them. Cedar, the mother bear's eldest offspring, now the patriarch of their extended family, sending an impression of satisfaction and continuity that transcended the boundaries of their separate species. 20 years later, a small group gathered in the forest clearing where it had all begun. The Rehabilitation Center had expanded into a global research institute dedicated to interspecies communication. The valley had become the model for similar sanctuaries established on every continent. Bridge mines were no longer rarities, but recognized members of communities worldwide, their abilities nurtured from childhood rather than dismissed as imagination or coincidence. Noah, now in his late 30s, stood beside Emma, whose hair had silvered, but whose eyes still held the same mixture of love and wonder that had allowed her to accept her son's extraordinary path. Beside them stood Noah's own children, twins who had inherited his sensitivity to animal consciousness and were already showing signs of developing their own unique expressions of this family gift. "This is where it happened," Noah told them, kneeling to their level as he had seen his mother do with him so many times. "Where a very small boy met two very frightened bear cubs, and neither knew they were supposed to be afraid of each other." The children nodded solemnly, already familiar with the story that had become part of humanity's collective narrative about its evolving relationship with the natural world. "The mother bear is buried near here," one of them said, looking around the sunlit clearing. "But you say she's still present in other ways." Noah smiled, placing a gentle hand on each child's shoulder. "Close your eyes," he instructed softly, "and listen not with your ears, but with that quiet place inside you that knows how to recognize family across all boundaries." As the children closed their eyes, their faces relaxed into expressions of deep concentration. Then, simultaneously, they broke into delighted smiles. "I feel them," his daughter exclaimed. "So many presences, like stars connected by invisible threads." "The whole forest is alive with consciousness," his son added wonderingly. "Not just separate creatures, but something bigger that includes all of them, includes us too." Noah exchanged a glance with Emma, who nodded in understanding. What had begun as one child's act of compassion toward two suffering cubs had blossomed into a transformed understanding of consciousness itself, an understanding that would continue to evolve through generations to come. In the canopy above them, birds settled on branches in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. At the edge of the clearing, the underbrush rustled as small creatures gathered to observe the human family. And from deeper in the forest came a soft, huffing sound, the greeting of the bears who continued to share this territory in the complex dance of coexistence that Noah had helped to choreograph. The circle that had begun in this clearing with a toddler's outstretched hand had expanded to encompass not just one human and two bears, but an entirely new way of being human in relationship with the more than human world. And somewhere, in whatever form consciousness persists beyond physical existence, the mother bear, who had first recognized the bridge-building capacity in a small boy's touch, continued to watch over this unfolding story, a story that had put not just one observer, but entire societies in tears of recognition and renewal. As the sun began to set over the clearing, casting the same golden light that had illuminated that first encounter so many years ago, Noah led his family back toward home, leaving only footprints to mark their visit. But in their wake, they left something more significant than physical traces, a legacy of connection that would continue to ripple outward through time, healing the ancient wound of separation between humans and the natural world, one relationship at a time, one open heart at a time, one act of simple compassion at a time. And in that, perhaps, lay the most profound truth of all, that the greatest revolutions begin not with grand gestures or complex theories, but with the most basic expression of what makes us human, the capacity to recognize suffering in another, and reach out a hand in comfort, regardless of the boundaries that seem to divide us. The case against Mercer and his accomplices was airtight, resulting in lengthy prison sentences and substantial financial penalties that would be directed toward forest restoration and expanded wildlife protection. But the legal victory, satisfying as it was overshadowed by a more profound development in Noah's relationship with the forest and its inhabitants. In the months following the fire and Mercer's arrest, Noah began to experience what Dr. Okafor carefully termed expanded awareness episodes. These were periods, sometimes lasting several hours, during which Noah would sit perfectly still, his eyes open but unfocused, seemingly oblivious to his surroundings. When he emerged from these states, he would describe experiences that defied conventional understanding. "I was flying with the eagles," he might say, or "I was swimming with the salmon, returning to spawn." At first, Emma and Dr. Okafor assumed these were vivid daydreams, or perhaps a psychological response to the trauma of the fire. But the details Noah provided, specific behaviors, locations, events occurring miles away in the forest, were repeatedly verified by research teams. "It's as if his consciousness is somehow merging with theirs," Dr. Okafor explained to Emma after one particularly lengthy episode during which Noah had traveled with a wolf pack on a hunting expedition. "The neurological scans we've been conducting show activity patterns unlike anything I've ever seen, as if his brain is simultaneously processing sensory information from multiple sources." Emma watched her son with mixed emotions, pride in his extraordinary abilities, wonder at the depths of his connection with the natural world, but also fear for what this might mean for his future. "Is he losing himself?" she asked hesitantly. "When he's with them in this way, is he still Noah?" Dr. Okafor considered the question carefully. "I believe he's becoming more fully Noah," she said finally. "This gift has been part of him since he was that toddler in the clearing. It's not consuming his identity, it's revealing it." As Noah's 15th birthday approached, the Rehabilitation Center, rebuilt and expanded after the fire, prepared for a special celebration. The valley had been transformed in the wake of Mercer's failed plans. Instead of a commercial resort, it had been designated as an expanded wildlife preserve with the Rehabilitation Center at its heart. More importantly, new legislation had been passed recognizing the area as a cross-species sanctuary, where innovative approaches to human-wildlife coexistence could be developed and studied. On the morning of his birthday, Noah woke before dawn and made his way to the small clearing where his journey had begun all those years ago. The physical signs of that first encounter were long gone. The stake where the cubs had been chained had been removed, the ground had healed, new vegetation had grown. But the memory remained, not just in Noah's mind, but somehow in the very soil and air of the place. He sat cross-legged on the dew-dampened grass, his eyes closed, his breathing deep and even. Around him, the forest gradually awakened. Birds began their morning songs. Small creatures rustled in the underbrush. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the canopy above. Noah wasn't surprised when he sensed her approach. The mother bear moved more slowly now, her age and injuries having taken their toll, but her presence in his awareness was as strong as ever. She settled beside him with a soft huff, her warm bulk a comfort in the cool morning air. No words passed between them, none were needed. Noah simply opened his mind, allowing his consciousness to merge with hers as had become natural for them. What flowed between them was a complex mixture of memory, emotion, and something more profound, a shared understanding of time and cycles and the interconnectedness of all living things. Through her eyes, Noah saw the forest as it had been decades ago, before human encroachment had fragmented habitats and disrupted ancient patterns. He felt her joy in motherhood, her fierce protectiveness toward her cubs, her grudging respect for the humans who had freed her young from chains. He experienced her fear during the fire and her trust that had overridden instinct, allowing her to follow the small human who had once stroked her cubs with such gentleness. In return, Noah shared with her his human perspective, the beauty he found in sunrise and music and mathematics, the complexity of human relationships, the struggle to balance progress with preservation. He showed her his memories of that day in the clearing, how it had shaped his life's purpose, how her trust had transformed not just his understanding of the natural world, but the understanding of all who had witnessed their extraordinary connection. As the sun climbed higher, Noah became aware of other presences gathering around them. The mother bear's adult offspring had arrived, each accompanied by cubs of their own. Behind them came other forest inhabitants, deer stepping delicately through the underbrush, a fox watching curiously from beneath a fallen log, birds settling in branches overhead, and even the wolf pack that Noah had recently traveled with, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly part of this impromptu gathering. Noah opened his eyes, wonder flooding through him at the sight of so many different species coexisting peacefully in this small clearing. This wasn't normal animal behavior, predator and prey sharing space without fear or aggression. Yet there was nothing threatening or coerced about their presence. They had come willingly, drawn by something Noah could sense but couldn't fully comprehend. The mother bear shifted beside him, her dark eyes reflecting the dappled sunlight as she surveyed the gathering. Through their connection, Noah felt her satisfaction and a deep, resonant emotion that he could only interpret as pride. Not just in her offspring, but in this moment. This convergence that somehow fulfilled a purpose long in the making. Then came an awareness that made Noah catch his breath. The animals weren't just gathering randomly. They were positioning themselves in a pattern. Concentric circles radiating outward from where he and the mother bear sat at the center. As the last creatures settled into place, a hushed anticipation fell over the clearing, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. The mother bear rose to her feet with surprising grace despite her age and injuries. She moved to stand directly in front of Noah, her massive form blocking his view of the gathered animals. For a moment, uncertainty flickered through him. Had he misunderstood something? Projected human meaning onto animal behavior that had simpler explanations? Then the bear did something unprecedented in all their years of interaction. She lowered her great head and touched her forehead to Noah's, in a gesture so gentle and deliberate that tears sprang to his eyes. The contact lasted only seconds, but in that brief connection, Noah experienced a flood of imagery and sensation, too intense to process in the moment. Fragments of memories not his own, glimpses of forests across time, the intertwined fates of humans and animals stretching back through generations. When the bear pulled away, Noah felt different, changed in ways he couldn't articulate. His awareness of the forest had expanded exponentially. He could sense every creature in the clearing with crystalline clarity, not just their physical presence, but their emotions, their histories, their connections to one another. More remarkably, he could sense similar gatherings occurring simultaneously in forests around the world, other humans and animals coming together in moments of profound connection. The mother bear returned to her place beside him, and as if responding to some unheard signal, the animals began to disperse. Not in fear or haste, but with purpose, returning to their territories and daily routines. Within minutes, only Noah and the bear family remained in the clearing. "What just happened?" Noah whispered, both to himself and to the bear beside him. Though she couldn't answer in words, the impression that flowed from her mind to his carried a clear message. This was both an ending and a beginning. A torch passed, a covenant renewed. Noah sat in silence for a long time after the bears, too, had departed. He was still there, lost in thought, when Emma found him mid-morning, worry creasing her brow. "Noah? Everyone's waiting at the center for your birthday celebration. Are you okay?" Noah looked up at his mother, seeing her with new eyes. Not just as the woman who had raised him, but as part of a larger pattern, a crucial link in a chain of events that had begun long before his birth. "I'm fine," he said softly. "Better than fine. Mom, something incredible just happened." As they walked back toward the rehabilitation center, Noah tried to explain what he had experienced. The words felt inadequate, but Emma listened without judgment, having long ago learned to trust her son's extraordinary perceptions. "It feels like I've been given a gift," Noah concluded as they approached the center where balloons festooned the entrance and a happy birthday banner hung above the door. "But also a responsibility. Does that make sense?" Emma squeezed his shoulder. "More than you know. Every gift comes with responsibility, especially the rare ones." The birthday celebration was joyful, but subdued, those closest to Noah sensing that something profound had occurred, even if they didn't understand its nature. Dr. Okafor presented him with the first copy of her newly published book, Cross-Species Communication, The Noah Parker Phenomenon, which documented their years of research together. Oliver, now the director of the expanded preserve, announced that a new research wing of the Rehabilitation Center would be named in Noah's honor. As meaningful as these tributes were, they paled in comparison to what Noah had experienced in the clearing that morning. He accepted the congratulations and gifts with genuine gratitude, but felt almost as if he were watching the proceedings from a distance, his mind still processing the extraordinary communion with the forest and its inhabitants. That evening, after the guests had departed and the center had grown quiet, Noah sat with Dr. Okafor in her office, attempting to describe more precisely what had happened in the clearing. "It wasn't just communication," he explained, struggling to find the right words. "It was integration. As if, for a few moments, the boundaries between us dissolved completely. And not just between me and the bears, but among all the creatures present." Dr. Okafor listened intently, taking notes but also watching Noah's face with keen interest. "And you believe similar gatherings were occurring elsewhere, simultaneously?" Noah nodded. "I could sense them, like points of light on a global map. Other people like me, connecting with animals in their regions. Not many, maybe a dozen worldwide, but each forming a kind of nexus, I guess you could call it. A point where human and animal consciousness merge and create something new." Dr. Okafor set down her pen, her expression thoughtful. "Noah, what you're describing aligns with certain theories in environmental psychology and indigenous wisdom traditions. The idea that human and animal consciousness aren't separate domains, but parts of a larger integrated system, what some call the world mind or collective bioconsciousness. She hesitated, then added carefully, "There's also emerging research suggesting that in times of ecological crisis, evolutionary pressures might select for enhanced interspecies communication, a biological imperative to cooperate across species boundaries for mutual survival." Noah considered this. "So, you think this is what? An evolutionary adaptation? My brain developing new pathways for survival?" "Perhaps," Dr. Okafor acknowledged. "Or perhaps it's something older, an ability humans once had but lost as we separated ourselves from the natural world. What the indigenous peoples of this region called speaking with the animal nations." Their conversation continued late into the night, but for all their scientific terminology and careful hypothesizing, both knew they were merely circling the edges of something that defied conventional understanding. In the days that followed his birthday, Noah began to notice subtle but significant changes in his abilities. His consciousness no longer traveled with animals during his expanded awareness episodes. Instead, he remained fully present in his human body while simultaneously perceiving through the senses of various forest creatures. It was as if his mind had become a junction box where information from multiple sources could be processed simultaneously without overwhelming him. More remarkably, he found he could extend this awareness to others through physical contact. When Emma took his hand during one such episode, she gasped as her perception suddenly expanded to include the flight of an eagle circling high above the center. "It's incredible," she whispered when the connection ended, tears streaming down her face. "To see through their eyes, to feel what they feel. Noah, this changes everything." Indeed, it did change everything. Not just for Noah and those closest to him, but for the scientific community's understanding of consciousness and interspecies relationships. As carefully controlled studies documented Noah's abilities, similar cases began to emerge around the world. Individuals who, often after significant encounters with wildlife, developed heightened sensitivity to animal consciousness. What had once been dismissed as mysticism or delusion was now being studied with rigorous scientific methods. Universities established new departments dedicated to interspecies communication. Conservation strategies were revolutionized as humans began to work with, rather than simply for endangered species, incorporating their needs and territories as communicated through these newly recognized bridge minds. Not everyone embraced these developments. Religious fundamentalists denounced Noah and others like him as unnatural or even demonic. Corporate interests that profited from environmental exploitation funded disinformation campaigns, questioning the validity of interspecies communication research. Politicians debated whether bridge minds like Noah should be registered and regulated as human-plus entities with different legal status. The controversy reached a boiling point on Noah's 16th birthday, when an international summit on interspecies communication was convened at the Rehabilitation Center. Scientists, government officials, indigenous leaders, and 15 confirmed bridge minds from around the world gathered to share research and develop ethical frameworks for this emerging field. Security was tight, given the threats that had been made against Noah and other bridge minds, but no one anticipated the sophistication of the attack when it came. As Noah prepared to deliver the opening address, a series of coordinated explosions rocked the perimeter of the center, taking out the security systems and causing chaos among the attendees. Through the smoke and confusion came armed intruders wearing masks depicting various predators, a twisted mockery of the connection between humans and animals that Noah represented. Their leader, face concealed behind a bear mask, strode directly toward Noah with deadly purpose. "The abomination ends today," a distorted voice announced. Humanity is meant to rule nature, not commune with it. Noah stood his ground, even as security personnel and attendees fled or sought cover. A strange calm had descended over him, the same clarity he had felt during the forest fire. He closed his eyes briefly, extending his awareness outward, connecting with every creature within miles of the center. The attackers faltered as they realized something was happening. Birds began to fill the sky above the building in unprecedented numbers. Deer emerged from the forest edge, forming a living barrier across the retreat paths the intruders had planned to use. Most dramatically, the bear family, now including the aging mother bear, her adult offspring, and several half-grown cubs, appeared at the main entrance of the conference hall. The leader fired his weapon at Noah, but at that precise moment, one of the younger bears charged forward with surprising speed, knocking him aside. The bullet went wide, striking a support column instead. Chaos erupted as the attackers found themselves facing not just human security but an army of forest creatures acting with coordinated purpose. What witnesses would later describe as the Great Harmony lasted less than 10 minutes. No humans or animals were killed, though several sustained injuries. The attackers were surrounded and disarmed by a combination of security personnel and strategic animal interventions. Wolves herding fleeing assailants back toward the center, birds creating disorienting flight patterns to confuse those trying to aim weapons, even squirrels dropping pine cones with uncanny accuracy on attackers attempting to hide. When it was over and the last attacker had been restrained, Noah stood in the center of the conference hall, surrounded by a circle of animals reminiscent of the gathering in the forest clearing on his birthday. Through his expanded awareness, he could feel the fear and confusion of the humans present, including many who had been skeptical of his abilities, giving way to awe and revelation. The leader of the attack was unmasked and revealed to be not Garrett Mercer, as many had suspected, but Jason Whitfield, CEO of a multinational corporation with significant investments in industries that profited from environmental exploitation. His companies had been among the most aggressive in lobbying against the protections being implemented based on interspecies communication research. "You don't understand what you're doing," Whitfield spat as authorities led him away. "These creatures aren't your friends. They're resources, meant to serve human needs. What you're promoting will set civilization back centuries." Noah faced him calmly. "No, Mr. Whitfield. What we're doing is moving forward, toward a more complete understanding of our place in the web of life. The idea that we must dominate nature to prosper is the real primitive thinking." As the media descended on the rehabilitation center in the aftermath of the attack, the undeniable evidence of coordinated action between Noah and the animals transformed public perception overnight. Video footage of wolves and security guards working in tandem to apprehend armed attackers, of birds creating diversionary tactics that saved human lives, went viral globally. The debate shifted from whether interspecies communication was real to how society should adapt to this new paradigm. In the quiet aftermath, once the reporters had filed their stories and the conference attendees had departed to spread the word in their own countries, Noah returned once more to the clearing in the forest. The mother bear was waiting for him, her aging body showing the strain of the day's events, but her mind as sharp and present as ever in their shared consciousness. Noah sat beside her, his back against the same fallen log where they had first connected all those years ago. "I never wanted to be at the center of a global movement," he confessed, both in words and in the deeper language they shared. "I just wanted to help animals like you." The bear's response flowed into his awareness, not in words, but in impressions that carried profound meaning. This was larger than both of them, a turning point long foretold in the ancient wisdom carried in her genetic memory. The severed connection between humans and the rest of the living world was beginning to heal, not through Noah's actions alone, but through a complex convergence of crises and awakenings across the planet. As twilight descended on the clearing, Noah experienced a vision. Whether it came from the bear's consciousness or from some deeper well of shared knowing, he couldn't tell. He saw the Earth as it might be a century hence, with cities redesigned to incorporate wildlife corridors, with humans and animals sharing spaces in ways that honored the needs of all species. He saw bridge minds like himself working with indigenous knowledge keepers to translate the wisdom of animal nations into frameworks that even the most urbanized humans could understand and implement. Most powerfully, he saw children, human children all over the world, developing from birth the ability to sense and communicate with the living beings around them. Not with his level of intensity, perhaps, but with enough awareness to ensure they would never see themselves as separate from or superior to the web of life that sustained them. The vision faded as true night fell over the forest. The mother bear rose with some difficulty, nudging Noah's shoulder in a gesture that had become their familiar goodbye. Through their connection, he sensed that she was tired beyond ordinary fatigue, the weight of years and purpose fulfilled, creating a readiness for what must come next. "You're leaving," Noah said softly, the realization bringing both understanding and grief. The impression that flowed back to him carried no fear of death, but a deep contentment. Her cubs were grown, with cubs of their own. The forest was healing from the fire, protected now as it hadn't been in generations. And Noah, the small human who had once patted her chained cubs with such innocence, had grown into his role as bridge between worlds. Her task was complete. Noah walked with her as far as the small stream that marked the boundary of her traditional territory. There they paused, and in a final exchange of consciousness, the mother bear shared with him her entire life's journey, from her own cubhood in these forests through the trauma of finding her young chained, and the extraordinary connection with the human child that had changed everything. She showed him how that singular event had altered not just her perception of humans, but had awakened in her a dormant capacity for cross-species understanding that had been passed to her offspring and now to theirs. In return, Noah shared with her his vision of the future, and his promise to continue the work they had begun together, creating spaces where humans and animals could relearn how to coexist as they had for most of their evolutionary history. With a final gentle huff, the mother bear turned and disappeared into the forest darkness. Noah remained by the stream until he could no longer sense her presence in his expanded awareness. He knew, with a certainty that transcended grief, that she was journeying to a remote part of the forest to complete her life cycle in the way of her ancestors. 3 days later, Noah led Emma, Oliver, and Dr. Okafor to a secluded cave high on the northern ridge of the valley. There, surrounded by generations of her offspring, the mother bear had passed peacefully into death. Her body lay in state, adorned with early spring flowers, placed by the paws of her family in a ritual that predated human observation. "I never even gave her a name," Noah said softly as they stood in witness to this natural yet ceremonial end. "All these years, and she was just the mother bear to me." "She had a name," Dr. Okafor said with quiet certainty, "in her own language, among her own kind. Our inability to pronounce it doesn't make it any less real." Emma slipped her hand into Noah's, and through their touch, he shared with her the bear's final gift, the complete life story and lineage that would now live on in human awareness, as well as in the genetic memory of her descendants. "She wasn't just a bear," Emma whispered. "She was a teacher." The scientists in their party respectfully collected small, non-invasive samples that would contribute to ongoing research: hair, saliva, tiny skin scrapings, but they left the body untouched otherwise. honoring the bear family's clear desire to manage their matriarch's remains in their own way. As they departed the cave, Noah paused at the entrance. Through his expanded awareness, he could sense the bear's descendants watching from concealed positions, not with fear or aggression, but with a complex mixture of grief and expectation. They were waiting to see if the humans would respect their mourning customs or impose their own. "We'll come back in a week," Noah said softly to his companions, "after they've completed their rituals. They'll let us know if there's anything they want us to do then." The adults nodded, accepting without question Noah's interpretation of the bear's wishes. This, too, marked a profound shift. The scientific and conservation communities no longer debating whether animals had complex emotional lives and social customs, but working to understand and respect them. In the days following the mother bear's death, Noah found himself experiencing a grief that was both deeply personal and strangely communal. Through his expanded awareness, he could sense the ripples of mourning spreading through the forest, not just among the bears, but among all the creatures who had participated in that extraordinary gathering on his birthday. It was as if a grandmother figure for the entire ecosystem had passed, leaving a temporary vacuum in the intricate web of relationships. Yet mingled with the grief was a sense of continuity and renewal. The mother bear's legacy lived on not just in her direct descendants, but in the transformed relationship between humans and animals that her extraordinary connection with Noah had catalyzed. What had begun as a chance encounter between a toddler and two chained cubs had blossomed into a movement that was reshaping humanity's place in the natural world. A month after the mother bear's passing, Noah received an unexpected visitor at the rehabilitation center. A young woman about his own age, with deep brown eyes and an air of quiet confidence, introduced herself as Lily Redfeather. She had traveled from a tribal reservation 2,000 miles away after experiencing visions of Noah and the bears. "I'm like you," she explained as they walked along the forest paths where Noah had first learned to communicate with the animals. "In my tribe, they call us spirit walkers, those who can move between the human and animal worlds. When I was 4 years old, I wandered away from our family camp and was found sitting among a pack of wolves. They were protecting me, they said, until my human family could find me." Noah listened, fascination mingling with a profound sense of recognition. Here was someone who understood his experiences from the inside, who had navigated similar challenges and discoveries. "After the attack at your conference was in the news, I knew I had to come," Lily continued. "My elders believe that what's happening, people like us appearing around the world, is the fulfillment of prophecies about a time when the broken relationship between humans and the rest of creation would begin to heal." She stopped walking and turned to face Noah directly, but they also warned me that opposition would grow stronger as the movement gains momentum. "Those who profit from exploiting the natural world won't surrender their power easily. What happened at your conference was just the beginning." Noah nodded, having sensed this truth himself in the increased security measures now surrounding the rehabilitation center and in the heated rhetoric dominating political discourse about human sovereignty versus animal rights. "We need to find the others," Lily said with quiet urgency. "The other bridge minds. There's strength in unity and knowledge we can share that will help us all develop our abilities more fully." This marked the beginning of what would later be called the Gathering of Voices, a global network of bridge minds working in their local ecosystems while sharing insights and strategies through both conventional communication and the deeper connections they were learning to forge across distance. Noah, with his scientific background and media visibility, became the public face of the movement, while Lily, with her grounding in indigenous traditions, provided essential wisdom about balancing the human and animal aspects of their shared work. As Noah's 17th birthday approached, the network had identified over 100 bridge mines worldwide, ranging in age from 4 to 92, each with unique strengths and challenges in their interspecies communication abilities. Some, like Noah, could form deep bonds with multiple species across broad categories. Others had more specialized connections, with marine mammals or birds or insects, but could perceive those specific consciousnesses with extraordinary detail and nuance. What united them all was a commitment to reshaping humanity's relationship with the natural world, not through preaching or politics, but through direct experience, allowing others to glimpse, however briefly, the rich tapestry of consciousness that surrounded them in their fellow creatures. The opposition, too, had organized. A coalition of resource extraction companies, religious fundamentalists, and political opportunists had formed the Human Primacy Alliance, dedicated to discrediting bridge mines and preserving what they called the natural order of human dominance. Their tactics ranged from sophisticated propaganda campaigns portraying interspecies communication as a hoax or mass delusion to more sinister efforts to identify and cure young children showing signs of enhanced animal empathy. On the eve of his birthday, Noah sat with Emma on the porch of their cottage, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. 3 years had passed since the forest fire, and the regrowth was well underway, new trees reaching skyward, undergrowth thickening, wildlife returning to reclaimed territories. "I've been thinking about that day in the clearing," Emma said, breaking a comfortable silence, "when you were tiny, and I found you sitting between those chained cubs." Noah smiled, the memory still vivid despite the years. "You must have been terrified." "Beyond terrified," Emma agreed, "but also awestruck. There was something so pure about how you approached them. No fear, no preconceptions, just that simple desire to comfort something in pain." She turned to look at her son, now nearly a man, with eyes that held both pride and wistfulness. "I sometimes wonder if that's the secret we all need to relearn. How to approach the world with that same openness." Noah considered this. Maybe that's why children seem to develop these abilities more easily than adults. They haven't yet learned all the reasons they're supposed to see themselves as separate from or superior to other living things. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft sound from the forest edge, a familiar huffing that brought them both to their feet. There, half illuminated by the porch light, stood the largest of the mother bear's offspring, an enormous male that Noah had named Cedar in his research notes. Behind him, partially concealed by shadows, were several other bears from the extended family. Cedar approached with deliberate steps, stopping at a respectful distance from the porch. In his massive jaws he gently carried something that he deposited on the ground before backing away with a soft grunt. Noah descended the steps slowly, aware of Emma's tension behind him, but confident in his understanding of the bear's intentions. What Cedar had brought was a gift. A perfect honeycomb wrapped in fresh leaves, placed precisely where Noah could retrieve it without the bears having to approach the cottage too closely. "It's a birthday gift," Noah said softly, genuine emotion tightening his throat. They remembered. As he carefully picked up the sweet offering, Noah extended his awareness toward the bear family. What he received in return was a complex impression of continuity and purpose, that though the mother bear had passed, her work with Noah would continue through her descendants. The bridge between their worlds remained intact, a living legacy more meaningful than any physical monument. That night, as Noah prepared for sleep, he experienced something unprecedented in all his years of interspecies communication. Rather than connecting with a specific animal consciousness, he found himself immersed in what could only be described as the unified awareness of the forest itself, not as an abstract concept but as a living, breathing superorganism of which each individual creature, including humans, formed an integral part. Through this vast composite consciousness, Noah perceived cycles of time that dwarfed human lifespans, the slow dance of forest succession playing out over 700 centuries, the intricate call and response between plant and animal populations, the subtle influences of climate and geology on the distribution of species. Most profoundly, he sensed how the recent development of bridge mines was not an evolutionary anomaly, but a response to planetary need. Nature itself selecting for traits that might help heal the rift between humans and the rest of the living world. When Noah shared this experience with Dr. Okafor the next morning, she listened with rapt attention, making careful notes but also visibly affected by the implications. "What you're describing aligns with James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis," she said when he had finished. "The idea that the Earth functions as a self-regulating system maintaining conditions suitable for life. If that system is now selecting for enhanced interspecies communication abilities in humans, it suggests a level of planetary intelligence we've barely begun to comprehend." The conversation might have continued in this scientific vein, but it was interrupted by the arrival of Lily Redfeather, her expression grave as she burst into Dr. Okafor's office without knocking. "They've taken one of us," she announced without preamble. Sophia Chen, the bridge mind working with ocean mammals in California. Armed men in unmarked vehicles grabbed her during her morning swim with the dolphin pod she studies. They tranquilized the dolphins that tried to intervene and took Sophia to an unknown location. The kidnapping of Sophia Chen marked a dangerous escalation in the conflict between bridge minds and those who opposed them. Within hours, the Human Primacy Alliance released a statement denying involvement, but suggesting that concerned citizens might take matters into their own hands if authorities continued to enable human-animal hybridization experiments at research facilities like the Rehabilitation Center. As Noah, Lily, and their network of allies worked frantically to locate Sophia, they encountered a wall of institutional indifference. Law enforcement agencies showed little interest in investigating what they characterized as the disappearance of a grown woman who probably just went off-grid for a while. Media outlets that had once celebrated Noah's abilities now ran skeptical pieces, questioning whether bridge minds were suffering from shared delusions or deliberately perpetrating hoaxes for attention and funding. "They're trying to isolate us," Lily observed grimly during a late-night strategy session at the Rehabilitation Center. "Turn public opinion against us so they can pick us off one by one without consequences." Noah nodded, exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath his eyes. For 3 days, he had been extending his awareness to its limits, trying to establish contact with Sophia through the marine mammals she had worked with. He had caught glimpses, fragmentary impressions of a windowless room, medical equipment, voices asking questions about the exact mechanisms of her communication with dolphins, but nothing concrete enough to determine her location. "We need to try something different," he said finally, straightening from his slumped position at the conference table. "If they're holding her somewhere inland, away from the cetaceans she normally connects with, we need to find another entry point into wherever she is." His gaze fell on Dr. Okafor's laptop, where satellite imagery showed possible facilities matching the limited information they had gleaned. "Every building has pests," he said slowly, an idea taking shape. "Mice, insects, birds nesting in ventilation systems. Creatures so common they're practically invisible to humans." Lily's eyes widened as she grasped his intention. "You want to try to connect with rodents or insects near where they're holding her? Has anyone in our network ever done that successfully? Not at this distance or with this level of specificity, Noah admitted. But if we work together, pool our abilities, it might be possible. What followed was an extraordinary experiment in collaborative consciousness. Noah, Lily, and 5 other bridge minds who were able to travel to the rehabilitation center on short notice formed a circle, holding hands to strengthen their connection. Together, they projected their awareness outward, focusing on the regions where Sophia might be held, and calling out to the smallest, most ubiquitous forms of life in those areas. For hours, nothing happened. Then, as dawn broke over the valley, Noah gasped as his consciousness made contact with something tiny, yet surprisingly complex. A common house mouse living in the walls of a remote research facility. Through the mouse's limited but acute senses, he caught a familiar scent. The distinctive blend of sea salt and the natural oils Sophia used in her hair instead of commercial products. "I found her," he whispered, his grip tightening on the hands of those beside him. "She's in a converted warehouse about 300 miles northeast of here, some kind of private research facility owned by a subsidiary of Whitfield Industries." The rescue operation that followed would later be described in a best-selling book as the first true collaboration between human and animal nations in modern history. While Noah, Lily, and their allies provided authorities with detailed information about the facility, including damning evidence of illegal human experimentation gathered through the senses of mice, cockroaches, and a family of sparrows nesting in the building's eaves, they simultaneously coordinated a more direct form of intervention. Local wildlife began to behave in ways that defied explanation by conventional science. Coyotes triggered security cameras at precise intervals, creating patterns that pulled guards away from their posts. A swarm of bees surrounded the facility's backup generator just as a random power outage affected the main electrical supply. Most dramatically, a herd of deer wandered onto the access road and refused to move, effectively blocking reinforcements when law enforcement finally raided the facility. Sophia Chen was rescued, weakened but alive, from a laboratory where researchers had been administering experimental drugs designed to disrupt her ability to communicate with marine mammals. Most damning were the records seized during the raid, revealing that Whitfield Industries had been testing similar compounds on children who showed early signs of enhanced animal empathy, all under the guise of treating species identity disorder, a fictitious condition they had lobbied to have included in psychiatric diagnostic manuals. The scandal that erupted transformed public discourse almost overnight. Whitfield was arrested on multiple charges ranging from kidnapping to illegal human experimentation. The Human Primacy Alliance collapsed as its corporate backers distanced themselves from the controversy. Most significantly, the United Nations convened an emergency session to draft the Declaration of Interspecies Rights, a document that would eventually be ratified by most member nations, formally recognizing the moral consideration due to non-human consciousnesses and the protected status of bridge minds who facilitated cross-species understanding. On Noah's 18th birthday, as he stood at the podium in the United Nations General Assembly to address representatives from around the world, he found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with that simple act of kindness toward 2 chained bear cubs. Behind him on the massive screen played footage of the forest clearing where it had all started, now designated as the world's first interspecies sanctuary, a place where humans could come to learn the forgotten art of communion with their non-human relatives. "We stand at a crossroads in human history," Noah began, his voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "For millennia, we have defined ourselves largely in opposition to the natural world, as conquerors, as exploiters, as being separate from and superior to the complex web of life that sustains us. That path has led us to the brink of ecological collapse and spiritual impoverishment.